I was meticulously wiping a thin layer of dust from the oak coffee table when my front door flew open without a knock. Heavy footsteps clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Before I could even turn around, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, marched into the living room, dropping her oversized designer tote bag directly onto my pristine entryway rug. "I'm hosting Christmas here this year, whether you like it or not," she announced loudly, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I paused, setting my microfiber cloth down next to a framed photo of my late husband. I turned to look at her. My son Lucas trailed in a few seconds later, closing the door softly behind him. He avoided my gaze, choosing instead to intensely study the floorboards. "Excuse me," I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. "My apartment is entirely too small for a real holiday gathering." Vanessa continued, waving a hand dismissively, as if my living room was merely a venue she had just rented. "Your house has the space. The open kitchen is perfect for the caterers, and we can set up the main dining area right here. It makes the most sense." I looked at Lucas, waiting for him to intervene. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other and offered a weak shrug. "She really wants a big party this year, Mom. It wouldn't be that much trouble." "The answer is no," I replied calmly, picking up my cloth again. "I am not hosting a crowd this year. I plan to have a quiet holiday." Vanessa crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "I didn't ask for permission, Rhonda. I'm telling you how it's going to be. The invitations are already decided. You literally just have to stay out of the way." She turned on her heel and began pointing at my furniture, muttering about which pieces needed to be moved to the garage to make room for folding tables. I watched her parade through my home, feeling a deep, quiet resolve settle in my chest. If she thought I was going to be a bystander in my own house, she had severely misjudged the situation. 2 days later, the reality of Vanessa's entitlement began to manifest in physical form. I walked into my kitchen to make my morning coffee and found a long, brightly colored sheet of paper magnetized to the refrigerator door. It was a checklist. The handwriting was sharp and demanding, explicitly detailing the chores I needed to complete before the week of Christmas. The list included tasks like deep clean the guest bathroom, clear out 2 shelves in the fridge for my ingredients, and move the patio furniture into the shed. I read the list twice, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. I didn't feel angry. I felt a profound sense of clarity. For the last 3 years since my husband passed away, I had allowed Vanessa to push small boundaries. I let her reorganize my pantry once because she said it was inefficient. I let her dictate the Thanksgiving menu last year. I had done it to keep the peace for Lucas. But this was no longer a matter of keeping the peace. This was an invasion. I pulled the paper from beneath the magnet. I didn't call Lucas to complain. I didn't text Vanessa to argue. I simply walked over to the home office, fed the brightly colored paper into the shredder, and listened to the satisfying hum of the blades, turning it into confetti. Later that evening, Lucas called. He sounded nervous. "Hey, Mom. Vanessa wanted me to ask if you've started clearing the fridge yet. She wants to drop off some early groceries tomorrow." "I haven't," I answered smoothly, wiping down the kitchen counter. "Because my groceries are in there. But Mom, she needs the space for the party." "There is no party happening here, Lucas." I was very clear, I reminded him. He sighed heavily, the sound of a man who just wanted everyone else to bend so he wouldn't have to. "Please just let her do this. It's easier than fighting." "I'm not fighting," I stated. "I'm just living in my house." I hung up the phone and locked the front door, knowing the storm was only just beginning to brew. The next morning, I was outside pruning my rose bushes when my neighbor Beatrice walked over to the low wooden fence dividing our properties. Beatrice was a retired schoolteacher with sharp eyes and a habit of knowing everyone's business before they did. "Morning, Rhonda," she greeted, leaning against the fence. Getting the yard ready for the big bash, I paused, my pruning shears hovering over a dead stem. "What bash, Beatrice?" She raised an eyebrow. Your daughter-in-law's Christmas extravaganza. She posted a huge announcement on Facebook last night, tagged your location and everything, said she's expecting 30 people from her side of the family, even hired a bartender. 30 people. Strangers mostly. People I had met perhaps once at their wedding, traipsing through my bedroom, spilling wine on my rugs and treating my sanctuary like a public banquet hall. Is that so? I murmured, clipping the dead stem with a sharp snap. You didn't know, Beatrice asked, genuine concern flickering in her eyes. Rhonda, if you need me to come over and play bouncer, you just say the word. Thank you, Beatrice. But I have it handled, I replied, giving her a reassuring nod. I went inside and washed my hands. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Vanessa was relying on my lifelong habit of politeness. She assumed that once the invitations were out, I would be too embarrassed to turn people away at the door. She thought she could socially engineer me into submission. I sat down at my dining table and looked around at the quiet, peaceful home I had built. I wasn't going to spend my golden years serving appetizers to 30 people who didn't respect me. I didn't need to argue with Vanessa anymore. Words had failed. It was time to shift my approach and ensure that my boundaries were impossible to cross. The following afternoon, my iPad chimed with a notification from my banking app. It was an alert for a declined transaction. I opened the app and adjusted my reading glasses. Someone had just tried to charge $800 to a grocery delivery service using my emergency credit card. When Lucas first moved out years ago, I gave him an authorized user card on my account for genuine emergencies, a broken-down car, a sudden medical bill. He had rarely used it, and always with permission. Now, apparently, Vanessa had decided an $800 catering order qualified as an emergency. Without a second thought, I tapped the screen and permanently deactivated the authorized card. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Vanessa. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Rhonda, your card just declined on my grocery app, she snapped, immediately bypassing any greeting. I need you to call the bank and authorize the purchase. The delivery slots for Christmas week are filling up fast. I canceled that card, Vanessa, I said evenly, organizing my mail on the kitchen island. You what? Why would you do that? How am I supposed to pay for the holiday food? Her voice pitched higher, laced with genuine shock. With your own money, I suggested. That card was for Lucas's emergencies. Buying prime rib for your 30 guests is not an emergency. We are hosting this at your house. The least you could do is help with the food costs since you don't have to travel, she demanded. As I have told you repeatedly, you are not hosting anything here. I am not paying for a party I did not agree to. You are being incredibly stubborn and selfish, she shouted. I'm trying to create memories for our family. You are trying to throw a party on my dime in my home without my consent, I corrected her quietly. That conversation is over. I pressed the end call button and set the phone down. The money was officially cut off, but I knew her stubbornness would drive her to find another way. With only 5 days left until Christmas, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Lucas had stopped calling, likely trying to avoid being caught in the crossfire. Vanessa, meanwhile, doubled down. Packages began arriving at my doorstep, boxes of cheap, tinsel disposable plates and gaudy table runners. I simply stacked them neatly on the front porch, refusing to bring them inside. Instead of stressing over the impending invasion, I sat at my laptop and did some research. Within 30 minutes, I found exactly what I needed: a small, cozy cabin rental nestled in the snowy mountains about 3 hours north. It had a stone fireplace, a deep bathtub, and 0 cell service. I booked it for 5 nights starting the day before Christmas Eve. That evening, I pulled a medium-sized suitcase from the hall closet and began to pack. Thick wool sweaters, a good book, some premium tea blends, and my favorite slippers. I was folding a scarf when the front door unlocked and opened. Lucas and Vanessa walked in. Vanessa stopped in the doorway of the guest bedroom, spotting my open suitcase on the bed. A smug smile spread across her face. "Oh, good. You're making space," she said, completely misinterpreting the scene. "My cousins are going to need to put their coats and bags somewhere. You can just put your personal things in the attic for now." I looked at her then, down at my neatly folded clothes. I didn't correct her. I didn't explain myself. Let her believe whatever she wanted. "Just make sure everything is cleared out by the 23rd, she instructed, turning to inspect the hallway. "We have a lot of people arriving early. Everything will be handled by the 23rd, I replied softly, zipping up a small toiletry bag. She heard submission, but I was quietly packing my freedom. There was one critical flaw in my plan that needed to be addressed. Lucas had a spare key to my house. I couldn't simply ask for it back. That would trigger a massive argument, and he might just hand it over to Vanessa to prove a point. I needed to control the access to my property on my own terms. The next morning, I called a local locksmith. He arrived within the hour in a white van, a friendly man with a tool belt and a graying beard. "Morning, ma'am. What seems to be the trouble?" he asked. "The front door deadbolt has been sticking terribly," I told him, which was partially true. It had been slightly stiff during the winter months. "I think it's time to replace it entirely. And the back door lock too, just to be safe." Within 45 minutes, he had swapped out the old brass fixtures for heavy-duty modern locks. I paid him in cash and dropped the shiny new keys into my purse. The heavy clinking sound was incredibly satisfying. Later that afternoon, Lucas stopped by to grab some mail that had been delivered to my house by mistake. He walked up to the front door and inserted his key. I watched through the window as he jiggled it, frowned, and tried again. Finally, he rang the doorbell. I opened the door, offering a warm smile. "Mom, my key isn't working," he said, confused. "Oh, I know. The old lock finally jammed completely this morning. I had a man come out and replace it," I explained, handing him his letters. "Right. Can I get the new spare?" he asked, holding out his hand. I looked at his outstretched hand, then met his eyes. "I haven't had copies made yet, Lucas. I'll get around to it after the holidays when things calm down." He looked like he wanted to argue, but my tone left no room for debate. He slowly lowered his hand. "Okay. Well, Vanessa will be here tomorrow to start setting up." "I'll see you both later," I said, closing the door firmly. The perimeter was secure. The house was entirely mine again. December 23rd arrived with a bitter chill in the air and a light dusting of snow on the driveway. According to the texts I had ignored from Vanessa, she and Lucas were planning to arrive around 3 in the afternoon to prep the house. At 9 in the morning, I finished my last cup of tea, washed the mug, and dried it carefully before placing it in the cupboard. The house was spotless quiet and entirely empty of holiday cheer. I hadn't put up a tree. I hadn't baked a single cookie. I walked down to the basement and located the main water valve, turning it off completely. Frozen pipes were a risk in this weather if the house was empty, and I wasn't taking any chances. Next, I went to the breaker box. I flipped the switch for the hot water heater and turned off the main power to the living room and kitchen. Upstairs, I walked over to the digital thermostat and lowered the temperature to 50 degrees. Just warm enough to keep the house from freezing, but entirely too cold for a comfortable gathering. I closed every blind and drew every curtain, plunging the house into heavy shadows. I put on my heavy winter coat, picked up my suitcase, and walked out the front door. I locked the new deadbolt with a solid metallic click. I tugged the handle twice to ensure it was secure. As I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my sedan, Beatrice waved from her porch. "Going, Rhonda?" she called out. "Just a little holiday retreat, Beatrice," I replied, getting into the driver's seat. "If you see anyone trying to bother the house, feel free to ignore them." She chuckled, giving me a knowing salute. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and drove away. Let them host their grand Christmas party in an empty, locked fortress. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I was comfortably settled in my mountain cabin. A fire was crackling merrily in the stone hearth, casting a warm orange glow across the wooden walls. I was wrapped in a thick blanket, nursing a glass of dry red wine, listening to the wind howl outside. Suddenly, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. The screen lit up with Lucas's name. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a barrage of text messages flooded in. "Mom, where are you? The front door is locked. My key doesn't work. Did you leave it locked on purpose? Vanessa is freezing. Open the door." I took a slow sip of my wine. 10 minutes passed. Then the messages turned frantic. Vanessa had clearly commandeered Lucas's phone. "Rhonda, the caterers just pulled up. Open the damn door. Half my family is parking on the street right now. This isn't funny. Where are you?" I could perfectly picture the scene. 30 people standing in the freezing Chicago wind, holding covered dishes and cheap bottles of wine, staring at a dark, silent house. Vanessa furiously rattling the doorknob, her designer boots sinking into the snow. Lucas standing helplessly on the porch, realizing that my boundaries were not suggestions. They couldn't get in. They had no key. They couldn't call a locksmith because they couldn't prove residency. They couldn't break a window with 30 relatives watching. There was no legal loophole, no dramatic confrontation. There was simply a locked door and a woman who refused to participate in her own disrespect. My phone vibrated again, nearly vibrating right off the table. The reality of my absence was finally hitting them, and I was exactly where I wanted to be. The text notifications continued to chime, echoing off the quiet cabin walls. I watched the screen light up with increasing desperation. "Mom, please. Vanessa is crying. Her parents are angry. We have 30 guests standing in the yard. At least tell us where the spare key is hidden." I set my wine glass down and picked up the phone. It was time to deliver the final word. I typed my response slowly, ensuring every word was deliberate. "I told you both weeks ago that I was not hosting a party. I told you I would not pay for it. I am currently out of town on a holiday trip. Do not contact me again until Christmas is over. Have a good night." I hit send. Almost instantly, my phone rang. Vanessa was calling from her own number. I calmly pressed the volume button down, muting the ringer, and went into the phone's settings. I activated the Do Not Disturb mode. The screen went dark. The room returned to the peaceful sound of popping firewood and the soft whistle of the wind. I didn't need to be there to know what happened next. Without access to my home, my kitchen, or my heat, Vanessa had no choice but to face her guests. She had to explain why the venue she promised was locked up tight. She had to take 30 hungry, freezing people and figure out a backup plan on Christmas Eve. There were no lawyers involved, no dramatic police sirens breaking the neighborhood peace. Just the cold, hard consequence of ignoring a homeowner's firm no. They had made their bed, and now they had to figure out where to sleep in it. I picked up my book, leaned back into the comfortable armchair, and began to read. I returned home 4 days later. The house was exactly as I left it, cold, dark, and perfectly silent. There were no traces of a party, no empty bottles on the lawn, just a few scattered footprints in the snow that were already fading. I turned the water and electricity back on, unpacked my bag, and made a fresh pot of tea. I didn't hear from Lucas until mid-January. He showed up on a Sunday afternoon looking exhausted. I let him in, offering him a seat at the kitchen island. We ended up taking everyone to a 24-hour diner off the highway. He mumbled, staring at his hands. It was a disaster. Vanessa's family was furious. She hasn't spoken to me in a week. "I'm sorry you had a bad holiday, Lucas," I said plainly, taking a seat across from him. "But you were warned. You embarrassed her mom. No, I corrected him firmly. Vanessa embarrassed herself by trying to hijack a house that does not belong to her. And you allowed it. He didn't have a response to that. He knew I was right. This is my home. I continued, my voice steady. If you want to visit me, you are always welcome. But if either of you ever tries to dictate what happens under my roof again, the door will remain locked. Do you understand? Lucas nodded slowly. Yeah, I understand. There was no tearful hug, no fake apologies to smooth things over. We drank our tea in a quiet, uneasy truce. But as he left that day, I locked the door behind him and felt a deep sense of relief. I had reclaimed my space. From that day on, my home was respected, and I finally had the peace I deserved.